All right. So we're breaking this down into multiple parts because change is a complicated topic. Now, the first and foremost important thing I have to mention is you should always seek the professional help of anybody when it comes to these matters as far as getting better in terms of mental health. I'm not a professional. I'm just some dude with a mic who comes on here and I tell you based on the research I've done as well as my own personal views on what's worked for me. So make sure that you're doing constant research because I may not always be right. And if I'm not, please correct me and I will look over the information and then I'll revise my videos. But the main thing I want to say is that if you don't believe in yourself, it's going to be a bumpy ride. You have to. It's as simple as that when it comes to believing in yourself. You have to. That doesn't mean you're arrogant or cocky or anything like that. It's just acknowledging that there's risk and that you are capable of doing it. So, what I want to present to you, first of all, is that even if you're the best version of yourself, you have to have a good environment. Here's the deal, right? We said this in a previous video, but so I won't touch on it too extensively, but just a brief recap. You can't exactly find peace in a war zone. If you're in the middle of a war zone, it's going to be hard to enjoy your hot cocoa and your blankies and your stuffed animals and your TV dinners. It's going to be extremely hard to do that. You're going to find that, oh God, this is pretty scary. And this is presented in like obvious manners, but there's some subtle ways that happens too. If you're having people who are constantly doubting you and saying you can't do something right, or people are trying to make you shoot down your own expectations of yourself and tell you that you can't do this or that, it can weigh on you really heavily. And to the point that not just it can weigh on you, but you can start to believe it yourself when you constantly hear that. Because the general idea is, oh my God, all these people are saying this. There must be something to it if I keep hearing it. And I find that misery does love company. So other people, they almost get jealous and they look at you and they're like, that should have been me. We see this in the terms of when people win the lottery. Normally what you would like to see is that people are cheerful for them. But instead, people come out the woodworks and they try to mooch off them and use them and even start to resent them. Instead of being happy for somebody else, they go, that should have been me. And you have to recognize that that isn't about the person. It's about they don't know how to process their emotions and their jealousy. And because of that, it comes out in the form of hatred. And it's not about you. They do that with anybody. So, keeping that in mind, it's so super duper important that you do have people who are going to love you, care about you, and promote the best version of you. So on to the next point I'd say is that you have to serve other people to serve yourself. What people often do is they'll look at you and they'll be like, I can fix them. Or they'll look at somebody as weak or broken and say, I'm going to help them. The problem with this is you always come out on top as far as the power dynamic and structure. Think of it in the terms of work with the boss and the coworker. The boss is always going to come out on top. That power dynamic is always going to remain there. No matter how helpful they are, the power dynamic is always going to be that the boss is not in a vulnerable position helping you. So if you want to help yourself as well as gain some perspective, and this applies to literally anybody, and you should continue to do this, is serving other people. If you are humble, this is great. If you're not humble, it's even better. Because it's a selfless act with no ego. You are offering yourself in a vulnerable position at somebody's beck and call and mercy. And even if it's not that extreme, it's something as simple as you're taking away the power dynamic that can make other people feel powerless. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. You're coming to somebody and you're saying, hey, look, let me help you. Because it's one thing to do something with the idea of a reward in mind. But if you really want to do good, then you help others. Doing good for other people will make you feel good. It'll affect the pleasure and reward centers of your brain and make you feel better for it. And again, this kind of ties back into the whole idea of you need a support system and you need good people around you. Because for you, it might not be a big deal. It might be one day of your time, or maybe you do one really nice thing for somebody. For somebody else, it'll be a lifetime of love and help. Let me give you an example. I was walking home from the pouring rain one day, and I had this really nice, sweet old lady say, hey, do you need a ride back home? I said, yeah, actually, I would love one, please. And she picked me up, and I got in her car, and I know everybody says not do that. I understand that. But I got in her car, and I went home with her. Not with her. She took me home, sorry. Oof. And she took me home. And I remember telling her about how I was struggling pretty heavily. She asked me what the case was. I just couldn't pay my bills at that time. I remember she gave me $100. And it was incredible. And as you can tell, it's made a huge impact on me because I remembered it years later. And you see the story of other people all the time. Often, the hardest part for anybody is getting the resources and finding the time. When you don't even know where to begin, how can you go about the finishing steps? So a lot of people are kind of wandering around aimlessly, just wondering, well, what do I do next? How do I do it? Even if I wanted to do it, I just don't know where to begin. I need somebody to believe in me, and you can't do it on your own. And that's why it adds value to people, because you're influencing them. Training someone at a job or hobby, you are building them up. You're giving them that confidence, letting them know you're not worthless. Hey, look, you're doing great at this. Even something as simple as basic skills, where you train somebody to be a burger flipper with the right mindset. Hey, you just learned something new. Good job. Look at you go. It's so you're helping build people's esteem by giving them skills. So if somebody feels like crap and feels like they can't do anything, they feel like shit, the easiest way to go about it is to train them in a job or field or a hobby or activity, and to give them that self-confidence, so that way they can look at themselves and say, look, well, I may not be able to do these things, but I can do these things. And that sure as heck is a lot better than where I was. So there was this really cool study that was done with thoracic surgery, where there were some groups of people. Now, one were given morphine, right? So, and the other half were given dose administered by a pre-programmed pump. So those who were given the morphine by the doctor, they'd show that they had significant reductions in pain levels. However, the other group, they did not receive the same benefits, and even with a smaller percentage, those in that second group that got the pre-programmed pump, they didn't receive any benefits at all. And you think, well, that's strange. And the biggest reason for that is that we have assigned roles of what everything means. And also the power of the mind's healing properties. Called placebo or something else, something bigger. But there's a really interesting way that when we believe in something, it acts as a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that can not just be bad, but it can also be good in these regards. Because we are expecting something, and so our mind primes us and gets us ready for that. So, when the patients are aware of benefits and those expected benefits, the treatment becomes a lot more effective. Otherwise, the treatment is blunted or even not effective at all. But again, like I said, it's not just about the faux pills, because it's a powerful, robust, consistent demonstration. It's the expectation to heal and recruit healing properties of the mind. So the mindset's lens of how we interpret the view of our world plays a big factor. And if all you are seeing is negative shit, if all you're looking for and all you believe the world is negative, you're going to be a lot more honed in on that. And unfortunately, that's the story of many people who just feel like the world is happening to them. So, with Professor Ellen Linger, they had a study that looked at 84 hotel housekeepers. And they were looking at hotels across the United States of America. And these housekeepers were on their feet all day long. And as you know, with something like this, you're burning a lot of calories doing this. This is very intensive work. But it's weird because it's not actually viewed that way. It's not even viewed as any work, even though it's a very physical labor job. So, when they were asked, do they view this as work? 2/3 of the housekeepers said no. And when they were asked if they viewed it as work. And 1/3 said they had no exercise at all. So, what they did was they split this into two groups of people. And they measured blood pressure, weight, and how happy they were with their job. And with one group of people, what they did is they took this 15-minute presentation that said that work is good exercise. And then they also, in that presentation, it mentions how the Surgeon General recommends about 30 minutes of exercise and how that as a housekeeper, you more than satisfy the definition that they're looking for. And they noticed that once 4 weeks later happened, that there was two groups of people. So for the first group of people who had the info, they looked different and they dropped weight. Not only did they have much better markers of like stuff like blood pressure, but they reported that they were more satisfied overall with their job. However, what we noticed was with the other group, we didn't tend to notice much of a change at all. So we can see that with those expectations going forward, the results changed. Now, when we look at, there were some people at Yale. Kelly Brownell, Will Corbin, and Peter Salovey, they did this test with the big batch milkshakes, right? They invited people with milkshakes. And part of the agreement is that they were going to give the individuals each $75 in exchange for their time. So what they do is, while the individuals were drinking the milkshakes, they were going to be hooked up, and over the course of this, they were going to get blood samples drawn. So what they were looking for was measuring the hunger hormone ghrelin. So in this study, they used this thing called a Sensi shake, which is a shake that is supposed to be health conscious. It's got 0 fat, 140 calories with no added sugars. And what they noticed was that with this shake, ghrelin dropped slightly, which makes sense. With a small amount of calories, it's proportionate to the fact that they would feel slightly less hungry, but not significantly. So then, a week later, they did the same thing with what was expected to be a different shake. And this one, this is what you'd call the indulgent shake. This is what you treat yourself out when you're going out to dessert and you're saying, I'm having a cheat meal. And with this, it's about 620 calories with 30 grams of fat and 56 grams of sugar. And they noticed that the ghrelin levels dropped significantly steeper. And it makes sense because of the amount of calories, fat, and sugar. Of course, it makes sense that they would be a lot more full. However, here's the catch. They were given the same shake each time. Even though they thought they consumed different shakes, they were given the same shake each time. So what we saw here was that what we believe and what we expect about foods determines our body's response to those foods. And I just think that's kind of incredible. So, what we need to understand is that if we want to start that step, the first thing and the most obvious thing is to live like who you want to be. Now, you can't do everything, but let's say you want to travel, right? Let's say somebody is, they're overweight, right? Let's say 30, 40 pounds overweight, and they said, if I lost some weight, I'd really like to travel. Well, you can still travel. Start living like that right now. Set small steps that tells your mind subconsciously, like, I am that person. Not I want to be that person, but I am that person. We spend all this time trying to make a to-do list and prioritize shit. We don't actually spend time tackling those things. And even worse, I've mentioned this previously, we spend time like where we'll do one thing and we're being productive, right? We're being productive. We're doing something right then and there. We're in doing mode. And yet then we think of something else we gotta do and we go back and forth, so we have a bunch of 80% finished tasks, and then we're like, well, what the heck, why can't I get anything done? Because you're already being productive, so you can let those other thoughts go away. And people are thinking, well, I don't want to forget about that. Well, set a reminder. If it's that important to you, set a reminder and come back to it. So that way you can let the thoughts slip out from you and you can get back to your work. Chances are you're not going to remember it on your own, and you can only keep a few things. You can only be focused on a few things at once before your mind totally gets overwhelmed and goes kaput and shuts down. So you need to keep that in mind, and you want to be fully focused in the flow zone. So that way you can give it your all, you can do way better, and you won't get so worn out as, oh my God, this is just overwhelming, and end up hating it. And I'll touch on another part of this about the difference between routines and habits. And I'll touch on that probably a little after this segment, because I have to break these down into different parts. I don't want to just do one huge video and then people be like, well, fuck that. I want to make these a little bit shorter so that way people can watch each one. And also just space out the content so I have stuff to post every day. So we'll touch on that a little bit. But it's important to live it one small step at a time. What is the first step? What is the very first step? What is the simplest thing you can break it down so it does not seem so overwhelming and you're like, oh, that's a huge mountain to climb? It's important to keep in mind that something is better than nothing. So when it comes to, like, let's say with working out, right? People are already tired before they even begin the workout because they have this expectation of what it's going to be like. They imagine how hard they're going to be running, and they're already tired. They can already feel it before they even start. And that's since you've already failed, because now it feels like a chore. You're not even looking forward to it. It doesn't sound exciting. So what I recommend you do is just start it. Just start the workout and pace yourself. You don't have to break yourself and go 110% on everything. The mere act that you get out there and do something. Because let's say even if you do bust your balls one day, the way you're going to benefit from most things is because of consistency. You're not going to see results of working out if you're not consistent with it. So it's a lot better if you do like slight jogs or brisk walks for 30 minutes every day than if you did one sprint once or twice a week. The idea is to be consistent, to build it into a routine, so that way that routine can become a habit, and a hobby even. That'd be really great, wouldn't it? So that way you can go on autopilot mode instead of having to have all these triggers that set it off for telling you when you should do it. So, moving forward with that, the more often you do something, it's important to keep in mind that it becomes easier. It becomes more familiar. And this is the subject I was talking about with your brain highways. So you're learning the trails and paths of this. Think of it like a jungle. And as you travel those paths more and more, they become easier to navigate. But first, you're very confused looking around like, where am I? So let's look at what it means to have a routine, right? So it's a sequence of action, the same way of what worked out well for you, right? So this is executed by what we'd call our wise planner. And the wise planner is slow and analytical. So it's aware of future conditions, and it considers what kind of result that you want while doing these. And routines, they can be turned into habits over time. and they become rewarding. So, with that being said, the reason that this can be difficult, though, if you're relying only on making things routines, is that it requires a lot more battery power, and you have to recharge yourself both mentally and physically before you can continue on. So if you just rush full forward, you're going to crash and burn, just like with exercising, and you'll be like, well, that was god-awful, and that will tell you, hey, man, I shouldn't have done that. So you got to take it slow and pace yourself out, give yourself plenty of breaks, and set up a schedule. So with stuff like habits, these are what you call like autopilot, right? So there's no convincing, there's no conversation that needs to be had. You're just going to do it. And this can be set in motion by context clues. So these context clues signal to the brain to begin the activity. So a good example is, let's say when you see your phone, right? And then you think, I should scroll through Instagram or Facebook. Or let's say you're hopping in your car and the first thought is to put on your seatbelt. You're not even thinking about it, you just put on your seatbelt. It's been done thousands of times, so it's become habit. So the immediate desire is based on what's around you, right? So let's look at that. So you need to consider, right? There's no considering the goals. And in turn, it's just a familiar, rewarding result where you just do something. So, for example, what I mean by this is when you eat something like chocolate, you just know it's tasty, right? It's not considering anything long-term as far as, is this good or bad for me? It's not like that. Like if a kid eats chocolate or ice cream, they're not thinking about like whether or not it's good for them. They're just thinking this tastes great. And so in terms, habits can be bad too, right? They can be very destructive, which is why it's important to keep in mind which ones you build. And I think keeping a bit of a journal or a diary log of what your habits are kind of makes you aware. Because a lot of people do stuff without even really recognizing what the triggers are for those habits. In the terms of smokers. Smokers sometimes will smell something, they'll have a cigarette with their morning coffee, or when they get stressed out, or they go inside their car, or any other number of reasons. And it's really hard for them to, and they don't recognize how many triggers they actually have until they start writing it down. And so you can't fix a problem unless you're actually aware of the problem, which is why you want to write that down. And to make yourself a little more unaware, you need to write down the pros and cons of each trigger. And so that kind of keeps in mind why you're doing it in the first place. And with some of these, you kind of know some of the cons, but you don't really know the extent. But even then, you need to know why you're doing it, because there was some reason that you thought it was beneficial to do that. Like whether or not it's like stuff with overeating, whereas that filled the role of making you feel comforted and making you feel better despite the negative things. So people hear all the the negative shit on why they should stop something, and they've heard it a million times, and at some point it gets irritating. It's posted all over cigarettes. So one thing that will help them more often than not is, instead of just saying that shit over and over to them again, you start listing the positive reasons for why they should quit. Hey, well, if you give up smoking, here's what you can expect. You can expect a longer, healthier life. You can see your kids walk down the aisle when they grow up. You can be there for them while they're growing up. You can have a better sex life with your partner because your dick's actually going to work. Amongst a myriad of other things. And this makes them excited. Because for some people, what happens is they almost feel defeated and they crumple up. And when they get stressed out, what do they do every time they smoke, right? So now they're stressed out about you telling them they're going to die and stuff. And their way of coping with stress is smoking or eating. And then in some weird twist of fate, they go right back to it and they go, oh, I'm really stressed. And then they don't even think about it, but then they go have a smoke to cope with it. So we want to get people excited and not stressed out. Of course it's important to know the risk factors. Of course that's important. But they already know that more than likely. And while it's important to remind them, we're trying to focus on things that they haven't even considered in the first place. Just saying the same shit over and over again, that robotic shit, it's just going to be annoying. And you're just stating information that they already know. If it was that simple, then they would have quit. Again, let me say it one more time for people who don't get it. If it was that simple, they would have already quit. So, with that being said, let's move on to something else. So let's talk about those things, right? And how we can make this a regular everyday thing that's very enjoyable. Well, for example, let's say you're working out. To make an exercise not so unbearable, something that you might do is you very well might be listening to music. And so this becomes a little more fun, and you start to associate music with the exercise. Or let's say you have a particularly cool pair of shoes. You set out your shoes or any other number of things, and these all act individually as triggers, and even together they can act as triggers. A certain park, certain pair of shoes, a certain smell, a certain outfit that you lay out. These all act as reminders and as triggers to get you out the door to work out, especially over time, because you learn to associate them and then you just start doing it automatically. So it takes about 15 to 250 days for a habit to be kicked off automatically by that trigger. And so it's important to keep in mind, because some people, what I see unfortunately they do is they try something for 3 or 4 days and then they just give up and they go, well, that wasn't for me. How can you say that? The reason your habits are so strong, the bad ones, is because you've spent years doing them and you've only spent a few days challenging them. So of course the years are going to beat them. They have way more experience. So it's going to take some hard work and it's going to take some dedication. And yet people don't keep that in mind. They kind of just go, well, woe is me. I guess it just wasn't meant to be. Have you even tried? Or did you just give up when things started getting a little tough? It's okay to mess up. It's okay to fall down and to fuck up. And it's how you respond to that and pick yourself up. Because if you never give up, then you've never failed. You don't lose until you truly give up. You just have setbacks. And it's so important to keep that in mind, because people have this idea of progress. You're going straight up all the time. But sometimes you fall down, you get set back, and even you get set back hard. You see this with drug addiction where people relapse. It's okay and a normal part of life. And it's important to recognize that, because if you beat yourself up, you're going to feel shitty. And then, again, back to the whole thing, it's a self-fulfilling cycle. You feel shitty, so you go and smoke or eat to cope with it. So instead, you need to ask yourself, well, what, you either win or you lose, or you learn. So then you look, well, where did I go wrong? What can I do better next time to be more prepared? Right? Love yourself. You have to love yourself for this. It's going to be awfully hard to do something if you're convinced that you're a piece of shit, because then it's like, oh, I'm always going to be this way. And it's like, well, fuck. So being aware of that problem really helps you. And I know I've said that over and over again, but it's extremely important. So write down in your habit journal what your journals are. And here's another thing when people say they have no time for exercise or stuff. Be honest with yourself. Break down your time. Because what I find that people do is they say they're tired, they say they don't have any energy, but then they spend 4 or 5 hours watching Netflix or jerking off or whatever else. Be honest and careful with the words you use, because the biggest lies that are the most harmful are the ones we tell ourselves. We almost start to believe it, and we start to lack that self-awareness. What you mean to say is, it's not a priority for me. If it's not a priority, then just own up to it. But you're never going to be able to get better if you can't even begin to talk about what it is you need to be better at. So you absolutely have the ability. And like I said, they don't have to be god-awful. You don't have to go out there and bust your balls. I love to bust my balls working out, to be honest. I've kind of pushed myself to that point. But not everybody has to do that. Not everybody has to go out there and go and start fucking, running, sweating 190 beats plus a minute. No, not everybody has to do that shit, right? Not everybody has to, and not everybody should. And there are days where I don't work out. And there are even days where I take it really, really easy. In fact, I'd say 80% of your runs should be slow runs. Should be easy runs. You don't want to hit it over and over, pedal to the metal, and burn through your gas way faster that way. And, yeah, you're going fast right now, but until you cover a lot less distance that way with your car or with your body. it's kind of like when we look at New Year's resolutions. We noticed that when people were studied about the New Year's resolutions, that it didn't even take 3 weeks for them to give up. It was about January 19th when people gave up. We have to go, well, what the hell happened there? Instead, what might help is New Year's reflections. So, what you can do is something like a year compass, and you want to summarize your year. So, part of this is asking yourself, what was the biggest challenge that I had there? And then, what am I most proud of? A few other questions and things to consider is, if somebody wrote a book on your life, what would it be called? And then, you need to imagine what next year you want to be about. And the reason that people fail a lot is because they don't get specific about things every morning. You need to have specific goals, because just saying something like, I want to be a better person, is not going to be very beneficial. Well, what the hell do you even mean? Better in what way? Better in what way? So you need to know the specific things, because if you don't know the things that you want to do good at, then you don't have your priorities. If you don't have your priorities, you're not going to get accomplished the things that you want to do, at least not the things that are important to you. And then when you do that, you need to sign it like it's a contract. Make it official with yourself. So, what I found why people lose so often, why they fail, is for a few different reasons. And for some of those reasons is that their goals aren't specific, measurable, or realistic. Again, back to, I want to be a better person. Well, that's not specific, and how far does that go? And, I want to be the best runner. Okay, well, that's not even measurable. What the fuck does that even mean? And that's not realistic either. You're not going to be Usain Bolt, right? So, when you're setting these goals, it sounds really cool, but the problem with these goals is that they're only achievable by the best version of yourself. So, you need to simplify your goals, and you need to have at least some sort of plan attached, but it needs to be flexible, right? So, you don't want to go one extreme or the other, because then you just got a whole other host of problems. And as well, you want to have people who are going to hold you accountable. So that way when you fall down, they'll pick you back up and they'll pat you on the back, wipe the dust off your shoulders, and they'll say, all right, let's get back on that horse. So that way they can provide the motivation for when you're feeling down and when you're feeling weak and when you need that pick-me-up. You need that extra power boost. And then we need to look at the good you versus the bad you. So I want you to take a list of everything you want to do in 2022. And you want to give each item a category in 3 rows. And in those, you want to separate some of the rows into your ideal you and the shitty you. And you want to write every idea that you can get done. And you want to make sure that you get that shit done, right? But the way you go about this is you look at the direction and bare minimum. So you need to manage your expectations and not get disappointed when things don't get done. What I see so often is that people go, man, I failed, I'm a piece of shit. You're not a piece of shit. You're a human being who's fallible just like the rest of us, and you're trying your best, and that's okay. In fact, what happens sometimes is people look at shit and they're praised for when they win, which is great. But the problem with that, of course, is that it's on the predication now that they have to do good to feel good and to get that praise from other people. Instead of telling people that they're praised for when they do good, we should praise them for the process and not the results. Because that way they'll constantly stay motivated, and then that way they'll always feel like, yes, at least I'm trying. All that matters is that I'm trying. All that matters is that I'm trying. Because when you build your success on winning, then it creates this high and low mentality that you see in games like League of Legends, where what people can go in the span of one day, or even in the span of an hour, go from, yes, I'm the best, I did so fucking good at this game, to, I'm a piece of shit and fuck my team and I hate this game, why do I even play this? So keep in mind, it is about the journey and not the destination. You are here to have fun. And that is super important when you want to do something. You are not going to continue doing something long term if you fucking hate it. And if you do, you'll end up being miserable. And the only thing you'll have gained is another number next to your age. So, when you're planning for this, it's also important to keep in mind that you don't have unlimited time in the world, right? You do have limited time. And what I mean is, your day is only composed of 24 hours. If you're working and then you have other chores and hobbies to do, you have to remember that those things are priorities and you can't just neglect it. So often what I'll see people do is they'll create all these plans and they won't actually have time for it. For example, I'm guilty of, if I have a project with video editing, I know that video might take 10, 12 hours. And then I sit down and only have 3 or 4 hours of free time. And then I'm working on it and I can't even fucking get it done. Or, for example, let's say you're running and you know that day you need to do, your workouts are typically an hour, but you got work in 15 minutes. Of course you're not going to get it done. So what you need to do is you need to set aside double time. Because Murphy's Law is anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And while that's not necessarily true, what is important to keep in mind is that things aren't always going to be super structured. Like when you're going on your way to work, you want to leave early because you might have traffic or congestion. There are variables and sometimes monkey wrenches get thrown in where you can't plan for everything. But what you can do is you can give it that extra time so that way if shit doesn't go as smoothly as you were originally anticipating, you're not scrambling around trying to finish it in a hurry and then you present this half-baked processed poo-poo. And you need to have an insight in mind when you're studying. Again, I said this again, but constant breaks that will help you so that way you don't hate yourself and you need to have fun. People oftentimes, what they'll do is they'll go really hard on the paint. They're like, yes, I'm being so productive. And then only to turn out that they get burned out and they're like, I fucking hate this later on. Don't be that guy. I've seen it happen with so many people. Make time for yourself. Make time for your family. Make time for your friends. Nobody ever on their deathbed goes, man, I wish I had busted my ass some more. Oftentimes they go, I should have said this, I should have said that. I wish I would have spent more time with my family members. I wish I would have said I loved them. And that's really important. So again, now, how the hell do you determine what is a priority? Well, I think it's important to start off with our proper terms. And these are the non-negotiables. So this could be something like you need to go get groceries. You need to take a shower so you can show up smelling fresh to your job. You need to eat food. You need to take care of your pets. You need to mow your lawn or whatever the fuck. Non-negotiables can be different for other people, but it can be something as simple as I need to make sure I wipe my ass and take a shit. I need to make sure that I go into the shower and clean myself off so I'm not messy as hell. And I need to make sure that I show up to my doctor's appointments or anything else. These are things that are hyper important and you need to do before anything else. So make sure that those are the plans that you factor in before anything else. And then we can break down other things that, they're important, but if we can't get around to them, that's okay. And what I think also helps is to look at people who are going to inspire you to want that change. I said this in the first one. But equally, if somebody can inspire you, then let them be a warning for the type of person that you could become. Because for all these obese people, and for all these people who smoke 3 packs a day, they all started off with the same level playing field that we all did. In the terms of, we were a kid growing up, and we were trying to figure out life. Now, of course, not everybody's life is the same, and some people really are at a disadvantage. And there's no denying that. However, even though we can't always control what happens to us, we can control how we choose to respond to life. There was this really cool thing where I can't remember, I saw this YouTube comment, and if I ever get around to finding it again, I'll definitely post it down below, but it was Two brothers had a father who was abusive and drank alcohol. One grew up to abuse his wife and drink alcohol because he saw his father do it. The other grew up to avoid alcohol and love his wife because he saw his father do it. And so it's important to keep in mind that they both grew up in the exact same environment, but both had a very different response on how that shaped them in the future. Because one saw what they could become, and they recognized that they had a little bit of the father in each of them. Anybody can become just like that man. And so when you try to create this idea of, they're just a monster, I'm nothing like them, are you sure? Are you really sure? Even when we look at atrocities like what happened with the Jewish people, unfortunately, and it's an atrocity, do not get it wrong, it's horrible what they did, and anybody who was involved in that, in no way, shape, or form deserves any sympathy from any of us. However, it's important to keep in mind why they did it. Because they were indoctrinated, they were brainwashed, and they accepted it as normalcy. And part of that normalcy is this push-pull method where you expose people to something a little bit, and then you just keep testing the waters. You get them to dip their toes in the water, and when they pull back, you say, okay, whoa. So you got them to step 2 steps forward, and then 1 step back. You let go a little bit, right? And you do the 2 steps forward, 1 foot back. And it's so gradual over time that they get from one end all the way over to the other end. And so it's not so obvious when we're starting to become a person we don't like that we're just like, whoa, well, how did this happen? Even in the smaller things in life, it can be something as simple as, like I was saying with this, where you start to take up drinking. At first it starts with, you're going out occasionally once a month to a restaurant. And you're like, well, that's really fun. And then you start weekend drinking. You thought, well, I could handle this every day. And you start having 1 drink every day. Now you had 2 drinks because 1 drink wasn't doing it like before. Oh, I like this slight buzz. I want to keep this going. And then you start building a tolerance, 3 drinks, 4 drinks, 5 drinks. Or even, you go from arguing with your partner and you get a little angrier more and more each time to now you're full on hitting them and then you end up killing them. Everybody says never me until it's them. So you have to actively keep on the lookout for that. It's crazy how one bad habit can destroy thousands of other good habits. And this can be seen with the myth of the healthy smoker who works out, eats healthy, if you want to say that, and doesn't drink. But yeah, he still smokes. And he ends up getting cancer, heart disease. Because you can have a group of 10 people building and constructing a house. Now it takes several months. But all it takes is one dumbass in a day's worth of time to come in with a bulldozer. And all that work they did, he was able to destroy it in a fraction of the time that it took for them to carefully build, plan, and make sure they had the resources and the team for it. It's a lot easier to destroy your work when you have one really bad habit. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this out with one last point. And it's the expectation of others that these things are going to do the work for you. For example, with those obese people, they think that, if they can just get the gastric bypass, that, they'll be skinny again. The problem is, with a lot of them, unfortunately, they end up regaining the weight because they go back to the same situations, the same environment amongst the same people, and they're only addressing the surface level of, I need to lose weight. Why are you eating? It's often in association with, for example, childhood trauma. Something happened to them, and they learned that food was a comfort that they could associate with that, and they didn't learn any other coping mechanisms. So you have to understand that there's no magic pill. That's not going to do the work for you. You have to do the work. And until you accept that, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to get anywhere else in life. With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed. And we're going to break down into a next part, probably sometime tomorrow. Thank you guys for watching, and you have a fantastic and blessed day.